I think when you move, when you leave people, places, it's traumatic. Moving abroad is one of the top, I think, 3 things that is major trauma in our lives. Death, divorce, and moving are right up there. So if we don't acknowledge that, it will definitely shake our core and our identity.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Decoding Diaspora Podcast, a podcast in which we delve deeper into the aspirations and everyday challenges of migrants, expats, and the diaspora. Well, in today's episode, we are going to talk about the idea of home. What is home for a migrant who has left their country or place of origin and moved maybe once, maybe many times over? What then is home for them? How do they find belonging in these new places? If ever, do they have to create it? Do they have to find it? What goes on into that mix? Well, to indulge me in this exploration today, I have the joy of being in conversation with Kathy Borys Siddiqui. Simply put, Kathy is a cultural bridge builder. She is the founder and CEO of Active Action, and she helps migrants and internationals coming into Denmark with intercultural competence training and well-being training. And not just migrants, but also their accompanying spouses. She helps them navigate this in-between existence between languages, cultures, and lands, and helps them find out if this could be a home for them and how to gain a sense of belonging. I cannot wait to get into the life story and journey of Kathy herself, since she has lived and explored many cultures and many countries. Kathy's journey has been fascinating. I want to hear all about her personal quest for home and belonging and how she translated those reflections and learnings professionally to help support internationals today. Can't wait. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you so much, Surabhi. It's a great pleasure to be here with you and your audience. I'm really thrilled to have this conversation. Thanks for having me.
This is wonderful that you could make time for this today, Kathy. So, Kathy, I have been reading some of your posts on social media, and which caught my attention, which caught my eye. And you have been writing very beautifully about how, when we speak in different languages, and if it is not our native language, we might miss out on expressing ourselves wholly, and a part of us may, we might miss out on not only expression but also who we are. Before you help me understand this very fine observation, help our audiences understand where you started your life journey, which is in Poland, and you soon after migrated in your childhood and migrated again in your youth. Take us through that journey so that we get a sense of where your insights are coming from.
Yes. Thank you so much, first of all, for the beautiful compliment. I have been exploring this topic for many years, and as you just mentioned, I do believe it comes from within. So it comes from also my experience where I started analyzing, being aware of that we are not fully ourselves when we cannot express ourselves in a new language. And having gone through this as a child, young adult, and then an adult coming to Denmark, it's different perspectives, but the feeling, I would say, is the same. And we can come back to that. It is a feeling of being isolated and feeling lonely. As an adult, I felt as if I had gone back to childhood, trying to learn how to speak. So that was quite challenging. But yes, my journey started in Poland. So I was born in Poznań in Poland, lived there to the age of 8 when my parents and I, mostly my parents, made the decision, but the 3 of us decided to leave Poland and move to Germany, where we were living and waiting for visas to then immigrate to the United States. And while we were there, I went to an international classroom in a German school where we had a beautiful teacher who was teaching us German, but also other subjects in German. And this was my first encounter being with children from all over the world. but also the first time I ever saw someone trying to teach foreigners a language in a very interesting way, because she just spoke German to us the whole time. We had different games and exercises to learn the language, but I believe because of that, we learned very quickly. So with less than a year, I was fluent in that language. And right when I was going to move into a German classroom, we got our visas and went on to then go and live in Chicago in the United States, where once again, I did not know the language. So I had to basically redo the same journey, but in a different country. And once again, I had to start from scratch, be in a classroom, not understand anything, and learn a new language. So again, it was about a year or so, and then I was fluent. And then my formative years were in the United States. At the age of 21, I decided to repatriate myself and go back home, as we've said, to Poland. And the reason was I wanted to study in Poland, but I also wanted to go back to my home country. I had a very strong pull to return, and I had always had that ever since I was little. You mentioned that you wanted to ask, how come?
Yes. So what I wanted to ask, in our previous conversation, you mentioned this strong pull that you wanted to go back to Poland. Having lived in Germany, having lived in the US, now you are age 21 or so, and you still are reminiscent of Poland and want to go back home. So then I wonder, wasn't Germany and the US in the meantime home for you? What was the need? What was the driving force to go back to Poland as a young adult?
Yes, brilliant question. So I believe that at the time when we were in those places, Germany, the United States, they were most definitely home. I didn't feel displaced or lonely. I had friends. I was at school. I was living a normal life of a child and then a young adult. But somewhere deep in my heart, I felt that I needed to return. And I think it's quite layered. It's never a simple answer when we ask ourselves or other people such questions. So for me, first and foremost, I think it was because I didn't have closure when I left. So we left during a quite tumultuous time in Poland. It was an opportunity for people who wanted to immigrate. It was a small window where we were allowed to leave.
Share with us the context. What was brewing in Poland at the time that made you and your family, your parents, to decide to leave?
Yeah, so my parents grew up in communism times, and when I was 8 years old, shortly before that, we had what was martial law. So basically, the country went through severe uproar where, we had police and military on the streets, we had curfews, we had food rations, food stamps. Oftentimes, there were times where there was no food, so basically grocery stores were empty, people stood in lines. It was a very, very difficult time. And so when the chance arose, my parents decided to leave because no one knew if it would end, when it would end. And I think those people that had the courage and also the means, if you had a network, many people left, right? It was people emigrating not only to the US, it was also Canada, it was some of the Scandinavian countries. There were also many Poles that moved to Sweden at that time. So that was the main reason for my parents making that difficult decision and for us to go. I believe because of that, it wasn't something that was exactly discussed with me or, because it was still quite a sensitive time and topic. So we left. I wasn't aware that I wasn't returning until a bit after. So I didn't have a closure in the sense of that I was saying goodbye to people, goodbye to my classmates. And I think that was probably one of the strongest pulls that I felt I needed to return because I never got a chance to really say goodbye. When I returned, many of, my family members were no longer there. It was a nostalgic, I think, decision as well because
So help me understand, when you say when I returned, after you left at age 8, when was the first time you returned back to Poland?
21.
21. So all these years, you were very far away from Poland and had not seen the space change and had no idea what was going on? Or were you watching through media and reports?
Yeah, we knew. We were in touch with family and friends, but it wasn't that I had physically gone back. So, no.
Yes. So you had this burning urge to get back because you didn't have a sense of closure when you left and you hadn't really wrapped things up properly. for yourself emotionally as an 8-year-old. And so what did you encounter upon your return?
I encountered a very different country, obviously. But I think the hardest thing for me was the nostalgia, the memories, and so many things had changed. So my grandparents were no longer there. Their house had been sold. There were other people living there. So a lot of my childhood memories were spent with them and in that house. That was very difficult. But also, seeing my family members being older and life had moved on, right? So I think it was a very interesting experience, but also very difficult. I think a lot of people still face that. We also face it now when we live abroad and we go back home, sort of say, that it's different. It never is the same way when we left it.
Indeed.
So I think a lot of internationals, expats, migrants struggle with this when they go back and forth.
Yes. So from going back and learning that things had changed, did you get the closure that you were seeking first and foremost?
Yes.
Did it feel good? And did you want to stay on?
It didn't feel good in the sense that it was sad. It was very emotional, but it was much needed.
Yes.
It was good in the sense that I experienced it. And I think also embracing those emotions is very, very important for all of us. And when we leave, when we move, it's necessary for us to say goodbye, to actually have a plan, like a goodbye plan. I think it makes it easier in the sense that we do have closure then. We can move forward with more ease, not to say that it's easy because it's not, but that we can start a new chapter or a new phase of our life when we've sort of said goodbye, and maybe we'll be back, maybe we'll be back to visit, but that part of our life is done in a way, right? Now we're moving on to something else.
And it just makes me think of how many people have left in a rush, not having the chance to say, to collect themselves, to say the proper goodbyes, to say, I'm done with the space for now. It can be tough.
Yes.
I can only imagine, because I did not experience anything of the kind. In fact, when I was going to leave India as a student of higher education, I left at age 23. And even though I was physically there drinking my farewell coffees, mentally I was already gone.
Yeah.
It was quite the opposite, because I had already left. I was just so ready. So there are so many different ways of leaving as well.
Exactly.
Now tell me, having been in Poland, between Poland and now we are in Denmark, and we're having this conversation in Denmark, and I think you and I have been in Denmark around the same time. It's been about 17, 18 odd years. Exactly. Okay. So we have that in common.
Yes.
How did Poland lead to Denmark?
So I am what I call a love pat. I did not come for work or education. I came solely because I met my husband, who is Danish, and moved here because of love, because of him.
He's of mixed origin as well.
Yes.
Yes.
So my father-in-law was born in India, but he is from Pakistan. He came to Denmark many, many, many years ago. And met my mother-in-law, who is Danish. And my husband came along, and he was born in Copenhagen and Rigshospital. So he's born and raised in Copenhagen, Denmark, lived in Odense as well. But
Right. So as a love pat, you arrived. Of course, you were accompanying your love interest, your partner. What was your expectation at the time of moving? Was life just so rosy and, all candy floss that you did not anticipate any challenges? Were there any challenges? How did it all pan out at that time?
Yeah. So it was not a rosy kind of, as you said, cotton candy unicorn kind of a trip. Absolutely not. We were newly married. I came from being a independent entrepreneur who had her own apartment. I was very settled. I had a very good life. So I did not move to Denmark in search of a better life in that sense.
Right. That's very important to put it out there, because everybody's motivations are different.
Exactly. So we come for different reasons.
Yeah.
And my expectation, I think, was a bit idealistic, very naive in the sense of it's Denmark, it's a Scandinavian Nordic country, they all speak English, they're very open, it will be a breeze to transition. And when I arrived, when we moved, we were living in Odense at that time. And I decided to study because I was very burnt out. I was very tired, and I thought this was my opportunity to do something for myself. So I thought, why not study, see how it is, meet people, and then get a job. That was my plan. And as we know,
so help me understand, did you opt in to study because that is what you really, really wanted to do, or because nothing else was working out? I'm not sure I got that.
No, it was, yeah, of course, and I'm happy to clarify. No, when we were talking about moving, I was saying to my husband that I just felt like I needed a break. I wanted to do something for my own brain, for myself, so this was a brilliant opportunity. Obviously, not everyone is that lucky to have that opportunity, but we figured, why not? I was taking a master's degree. It was 2 years, and from there on to then get a full-time job, but it was kind of like a brain break.
Yeah, and so it was entirely intended, and that's what you sought, and it worked out that way.
Yes.
Right. And then what were the initial years like? I mean, we have been here 17 years. From being in 17 years ago, you and I can both vouch for it. Things were very different here in Denmark. Everything was predominantly in English, even signages, all communication, messages on the phone, the auto messages, all in sundry big and small examples. It was less international friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Between those early years and now you are running your own agency where you work with intercultural competence training. Much has happened in the interim.
Yes.
To the extent possible, if you can give us a fast track, run through of that journey.
Yes. So exactly as you mentioned, at that time, 17 years ago, Odense, on Fyn, there was no focus on internationals. So we have to say that Denmark has made big strides in the sense of really focusing, developing different organizations, developing support systems for the internationals coming in. There was absolutely nothing except for Danish school and Danish classes where internationals met each other, if they were lucky, befriended each other, and had some sort of community and support system. There were no international communities that are part of municipalities. There wasn't focus on retention, on attraction. Nothing like that existed. So we were pretty much left to our own devices to figure things out and to make things work for us. And as you said, in Odense, everything was in Danish. Everything was in Danish. And that was already the first challenge, because for me, I thought, okay, I had just arrived. I do not know the language, and no one is willing to speak even a word of English. So that was a huge shock for me.
Which is kind of a slightly different from Copenhagen, where Copenhagen and surroundings. I was based out of Copenhagen and Roskilde, and I was fortunate where I ended up buying butter, and it was unsalted butter the first time I bought butter, and it was a new experience for me. So the second time I went, I asked a random stranger, can you show me the way? Where do I get the right butter? Conversations were in English, thankfully, those local conversations. But there is some difference there between Copenhagen and Odense. But I mean, yes, it was still predominantly in Danish. So tell me, what were the initial challenges?
I think it was, again, I will keep repeating this because it's individual and it's layered for everybody. So for me, first and foremost, it was going from being very independent to feeling like I was completely dependent on my husband, first and foremost. Right. Because of the language. Second, also financially, I was not working. I was a student. And when I did graduate, I was looking for a job for a year and a half.
Yes.
It was a very difficult time for us.
Yeah.
His intention was never that I would struggle so much and be so sad and so upset. where, it was the classic scenario where my confidence and feeling of self-worth really plummeted because I thought,
Of course.
I felt that I could add value and be someone who a company would be happy to hire. And it felt as if
Yeah.
absolutely that was not the case, that no one even would, return an email saying, no, sorry, we're not interested. It was just dead silence.
Wow.
So that was difficult. So on a personal level and on a professional level, there were many challenges. And I did feel it in my mental well-being. I became very depressed and it was really difficult. I was avoiding any kind of contact with people. I didn't want to go out. At one point we were thinking, should we move to Poland? Should we go somewhere else? Because it was just not healthy and I was definitely not thriving. So it was difficult.
Yeah, sounds tough. Just a matter of detail. When you opted in for education at the university, did you have to pay tuition fees? Did you have access to state education support, which is SU? What was that scene like?
I did because I am an EU citizen, so I have a
You
Polish
have the
citizenship.
Polish
I'm
citizenship.
Polish.
Right. Good to know. Good to
So
know.
in that sense, it was much easier than for the
It was
non-EU.
accessible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great to know. Okay. And then did you have the typical challenges with the weather? And was the food difficult? Were there any other practical lived bodily challenges apart from the understandable ones of self-worth and independence?
So there was, of course, missing family and friends because I am
Right.
extroverted. I am very social. So I felt definitely the lack of a community, my people, my tribe.
Yeah.
So that was definitely physical and, again, the mental well-being. But the weather in the beginning for me was quite horrendous. I felt that the wind, the temperatures were not what I was used to.
Yeah.
Like the first summer, because I moved in the summer, and I remember thinking I will never wear any of my clothes. I can just go and sell them because it's just too cold. And I thought it was absolute madness looking at people walking around in flip-flops when I just wanted to wear boots almost because it was so cold.
Well said.
So that was difficult. I think the first 2 years were also hard with fall and winter, the darkness and just the rain. But we were quite good about making the best of it. So really finding, how can we make things more cozy and just to enjoy being indoors maybe more. I've always been running, so we did that even though the weather was not that great. So that was definitely helpful, having an activity and exercise, because of course it also helps with endorphins and,
Sure,
the
exactly.
hormones, the positive hormones that are triggered when we exercise. So that was a bit of help there. Food-wise, I would say no, because we don't ever eat very traditionally. We have more of a Mediterranean diet, and so seafood and fish, fresh fish. So that was very much available. So that was wonderful. I thought that was great. But I think it was just the first 2 years that were quite difficult to adapt and to adjust.
Yeah. And when you were considering with your partner if you should consider relocating at all, how did that conversation land? I mean, I know you're still here, but how did you weigh it out?
So it was many
What made you stay?
conversations. It was many because there was that moment, I think it was the lowest of the low, when I would just, we would get ready for bed, and then be in bed, I would be reading, and I would just be sobbing and crying because something would trigger me and make me think of what in the world am I doing here? Why am I putting myself? Obviously, I love my husband and we're still married. That was a definitely big part of it. But in the sense of me as a person, my own identity, I just felt this is absolutely crazy. What am I doing? I am basically jobless, searching for work, not having any interviews. I applied for every possible position you can imagine. And of course, a lot of the ones that I applied, I applied at one point for a sous chef in a sushi place, and they wrote me back. They were one of the first people that actually did write me back and said, you are absolutely overqualified. And I think that pushed me over the edge, because I actually remember this, being in bed and saying, no one wants to hire me. They don't even want me to, cook rice in a sushi place. So what does that say? Like, where have we ended up? And my husband was always great about everything. And he said, if this is the case, he said, this is not what the intention was. I absolutely never thought that this is where we would be. And let's try to figure out, maybe there's a different place for us. Maybe we have, different opportunities somewhere where we can easily both feel that we're thriving and we're valued, and that, we're equals. Because that was also the other thing. Because I would say, I feel like a burden because you're supporting us. He had started a business not long before we got married. So it was really tough times for us. It wasn't easy. And we kept having these discussions, but at the same time, I was still applying. I was still networking, meeting people, because I had gotten a bit to a better place to say to myself, I'm not going to quit unless I really give it all. And at that point, I hadn't given it all. So I thought, I need to go and speak to the people that we do know. Some of them were Danish. What do they suggest? What do they think? How can I approach this in a different way, applying for different jobs? And what are their tips? So when I started doing that, things started moving a little bit. And I think it was also my mindset that I thought, I will not give up yet. I'm going to really power through this. Then I got some potential job possibilities. So I I received, I think it was 1 or 2, to teach English at like FOF and AOF. There was also a job opening to teach a course at SDU in
University of Southern Denmark.
Yeah. And then I got an interview with the corporation I ended up working for, and that was in Esbjerg, where they were looking for someone for their marketing department, but they needed someone with native English. And so even though I didn't fit, I didn't check all the boxes completely, that part outweighed it for them, because that's what they
Your
needed.
knowledge of English as a native.
Yes.
Outweighed. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have a marketing degree. I didn't work in marketing, but my boss back then just said, I can teach you all those things. What I need is someone who can write without me having to check and change every single paragraph. So that also goes to show that when we are applying, when we are internationals, we don't have to tick all the boxes.
Yeah. Well, that is a very interesting takeaway and insight from your experience for whoever is watching this, that don't cancel yourself, don't reject yourself, and don't not apply because you don't have to check all the boxes. Now, I cannot help ask you, after all these years, do you have a sense of home here now?
Yes.
That's beautiful, music to my ears, and I'm happy to hear that. And now when you work as an intercultural competence trainer, how do you help? What kind of conversations are you having with internationals here in Denmark, coming to Denmark for whatever reason? How does one deconstruct this idea of home, feel at peace, have a sense of belonging? What does it even mean?
My goodness, where do we start? I will probably start with this, and you and I, we've talked about this before. I have a strong belief that our personalities and certain traits that we have, and also values that are important to us, match with certain countries or cities, not necessarily always countries, but cities, sometimes more than with others.
Indeed. Well said.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to be aware. And of course, we can't know this unless we try it, because going on vacation is not the same as living in a place day to day, and going to the supermarket and your bills, meeting with people. It's not the same. So we have to realize that even though we may really want to live somewhere and it's our dream of ours, it may not always be aligned with us. And then we have these clashes. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I do believe that belonging and sense of home, first and foremost, comes from here. So if we are at peace with ourselves. And that's a long journey and a lot of work for all of us. I think it's much easier to find peace and belonging somewhere else. So that's another thing that for me, it's very much sense of peace and contentment comes from knowing myself, having done a lot of work on myself. Obviously, also the people, we can't omit that factor. We, as humans, we are pack animals, sort of say. Maybe it's not the nicest way to call it, but we need each other. Even the people who like solitude and like to be on their own and love their own company, they also venture out from time to time and need to be with others. So we have that need. We need to have our people. That's, of course, over the years has happened for me as well. So one thing is family, my loved ones, my husband, my daughter. The other thing is having great friends, people that, you know, you can do other things with and talk about other things with. So that's all part of, I think, having a sense of belonging and peace. And then, of course, also understanding the place that you live in. So as internationals, we do have to take initiative with curiosity and find out this place that I'm in. What is the culture about? What is the history about? And ask as much as possible, how come people are doing this or that? And even ask the locals if you feel comfortable or you have some people that you know already a little bit. Ask them. People love to talk about themselves. People also like to talk about their own countries and share their knowledge and experiences. And I think what better way, instead of assuming and guessing, well, maybe it's because of this or that, than asking.
So what you're saying is that it is a mix of who you are. It's a chemistry thing. If a person vibes well for you. Secondly, you know, the community that you find and create. And thirdly, you are saying it's your own initiative to be interested in this new place, its ways, its people, and going out and asking. All of those three ingredients work towards finding a home. Someone might ask, Kathy, you've been in an enviable situation where you have found community in Denmark. How did that happen? You're married to a Dane, you have access to Danish people. Have you struggled with making Danish friends? Or maybe not?
See, this is always the interesting thing because we always talk about this, right? It's so hard to meet Danes. It's so difficult. I will say this. I think in the beginning, I was always looking for internationals because I felt that was the tribe that understood me and I understood.
Yeah, and you have something in common.
Yes.
You know? The same kind of lived experiences.
Exactly. But as time went on, I noticed that I actually have a lot of Danish friends. And it was very organic, I would say, the way that these relationships developed. All of them developed because of common interests. So here's
Great to hear. Yes.
We know this. Danes are much more open when you have something in common. So when you're sharing a certain interest, activity, whatever that is, they will be much more willing to let you in. So looking for commonalities is maybe a tip, but I would say going out and finding Danish friends, and I'm sorry everyone, but it just sounds quite a bit forced. And I think if we just allow things to happen, if we're present, if we go and join clubs, if we are doing activities, I'm sure there are also Danes there. And so just, you know, being open, having conversations. And I think it happens when it happens naturally. I think it's much more long lasting. And I think that's what I would always recommend. Also, the place we live, except for one, we have all Danish neighbors. We've been very lucky. Our street is small. And when we moved in here, everyone came to say hello. They brought things, which, you know, a lot of people said that's not really the norm. But a lot of our neighbors have also lived abroad. So
that's very interesting that your neighbors brought you things. I haven't experienced that at all. Yeah, but interesting because they have had this exposure from living elsewhere.
Yeah.
Very cool. And well, we have so much to talk about. Otherwise, I would ask, you know, if the wonderful Danes whom you had shared interests with made time for you, and apparently they must have, if there is a relationship, because, you know, calendars are always booked and overbooked.
But so are ours, right? I mean, the longer we live here, we adapt in that same way.
Absolutely, absolutely. We operate in the same way because that's how this world operates. And I remember telling it to a Bengali young woman I met last year who just landed, was fresh off the plane, as she said. We do have to, we know our calendar weeks by heart, which is a very Danish way of being. And I can tell you in this week I'm available if they hit this in this slot. So yes, we adapt as well.
Yeah.
Now, when you are meeting new people, what are the typical challenges that you confront when you do these trainings and also some well-being trainings? And are you training people when a company invites you or when people reach out to you directly? How do you offer your support professionally?
Yes. So professionally, most of my work is done with larger groups. So it's through companies where they approach me, I get hired, and we do a training. It's very often tailor made depending on where the pain points are or what they want to focus on. So with intercultural awareness and communication, it's very often about, if they are, and they mostly are, Danish-based companies with a lot of internationals who are hired in, or a company that's Danish but has expanded globally. So we have offices and people all over the world with the headquarters still in Denmark. So there we focus on how do we understand each other and work well together? And it's, so it's a lot of different topics depending on what they need, but work-based, it can be anything from meetings to humor at work to the flat structure that is often in the headquarters, but also can trickle over into the different based offices. How do we handle that versus ones that are based more on hierarchy? So basically looking at work culture in different places and then Denmark, and really it's just explaining it to each other so that they have more understanding and awareness. How come a colleague is doing things this way and I do things this way? With intercultural communication, it's the same. So it's basically teaching individuals how to ask each other questions and how do we communicate what is appropriate, what is respectful, what is disrespectful, what for some people is crossing a boundary and for others is just simply normal. So again, it's just about awareness and understanding so people can have these moments of understanding that not everyone does things as I do. Not everyone knows what I know. And if we have that awareness, and also not to assume, right? So the more we're able to communicate with one another, the less assumptions we will have. And assumptions are very much what leads to conflicts.
Indeed.
So there's a lot of work. With that.
Because if you're not engaging with each other and not communicating with each other, we will always cling to this idea of someone, the assumption of someone, and possibly even a stereotype. And then we are not really engaging.
Yeah.
But tell me, in all of this, have you struggled now where you are and in the journey so far? Have you struggled with the idea of where do I really belong? Or now I'm happy here, I belong here? How did you come to terms with that internal dialogue?
So I'll answer that, and then I'll just also briefly talk about the well-being part, because that's also really important that you asked me in the previous question. I don't think I'm struggling now. I think I've realized that I belong to many different places, and how would I put this? That some of them are from the past, some of them are now, and there probably will be some that are in the future as well. And just being open to that, because I think also as we develop our own selves and we change and grow, it is a part of that. So it's realizing nothing will ever stay the same. Even if we don't move countries, if we stay in our home country, it will not be the same place that it was when we were kids, when we were teenagers. So change is unavoidable. That's our constant in life, I would say. And the other thing is, it's not, the places won't make us happy. And also other people, it's not their job to do that. It's our own job to find that within ourselves. So I think through a lot of different things that I've done for myself, I've come to these realizations, and I don't feel that I need to search. I think it's more being aware and just being more accepting of what's happening and understanding also. As I said, if there's a place that's not for me, I think I'll be more at peace to say, this was great, but maybe it's not my place. Maybe
Yeah.
I can find it somewhere else. And that ties into the well-being, because I think when you move, when you leave people, places, it's traumatic. Moving abroad is one of the top, I think, 3 things that is major trauma in our lives. Death, divorce, and moving are right up there. So if we don't acknowledge that, it will definitely shake our core and our identity. So we have to be aware of that to understand of the cultural adjustment phases that we go through. A lot of internationals don't know what's happening to them. You asked me that before, what I come in contact with. One of the first things is that people don't realize what's happening to them. Why am I feeling so sad? Why do I feel depressed?
Yeah.
And they feel there's something wrong with them. And I know this because I also felt that. There's nothing wrong with you. If you're listening to us and you're feeling super sad and you miss your old self and your old home, it is normal. This is what happens when we move. It will pass. If it's severe, I always say this, please get help. There's no shame in that. There are therapists and psychologists out there who specialize in expat and international well-being. They know exactly what to do and how to help us. So that's a little bit of my plea. Get help if you are feeling that you cannot handle this yourself. But with well-being, what I do is we work on these things a bit to explain what is happening to us, why these emotions come up, what can we do about them. I work also with universities, and here the well-being part is about understanding imposter syndrome. A lot of professionals in different fields can experience that in a very heightened level. I work also with the well-being in general. What is well-being, and what are some tools that we can use to practice that? When you move abroad, you need to have some stability, and one way to have that is to have certain well-being practices, whether it's yoga or having, making your tea or having exercise routine that you implement right away and you don't change that.
Yeah. And it's so good that you articulate it this way, that there are some self-care steps and routines we can adopt to navigate this tumultuous time of transition. At one point, you had also mentioned that, everybody takes to transitions differently. And I just want to note, while I fully acknowledge that this can be rough, there are people like me. In my case, I actually was so ready. My readiness to that move was so complete and overarching a sentiment that I did not ask what is happening. Why am I here? Because I was just truly ready mentally, emotionally. Now, you mentioned quickly, going back to before we wrap up, you mentioned about the imposter syndrome that internationals are feeling at a very high degree. Why is that? Is it because the degrees are not recognized, or qualifications and experiences from elsewhere are not recognized?
No.
Why is that happening? No.
It's not all internationals. What I meant is that certain professions have a high degree of imposter syndrome.
And what are those professions?
So, for example, academia is one of them.
Right.
Doctors, journalists, everyone who is also working in the entertainment. So if you're actor, actress, singer, performer, because there is a lot of competition oftentimes. That's a whole different episode we could do, because it's quite complicated to explain it. There are reasons behind it, why certain individuals feel it, and why certain professions have that. But also, to put it, in a different perspective, it's also for different groups. If we come from a group that is not the majority in a certain field or profession, or even department, we may start to feel that because there is no one else who looks like us.
Exactly.
So that's really important also to make people aware of. And it's not just internationals, but it's also people hiring. And as I said, that's a different topic. But sometimes we also face the imposter syndrome because we're hired for a position or a job. I think I actually had it when I was in marketing, because I was like, I know nothing about this. I shouldn't be here. This is not my place. I would often feel that at times, because I would think, I'm not prepared for that, right? So we can also see it in internationals when they change careers.
Exactly.
They have been working with something completely different, but because they need to have a degree from Denmark, or their degrees are not recognized or it will take too long, they decide to shift and have different careers, so they can also feel that imposter syndrome or phenomenon coming and being a part of their lives for some time, hopefully not for very long.
Yeah, I think it's remarkable the work that you're doing, Kathy. You have literally harnessed your own experience and learnings from navigating as an international in very many countries and over the past 17 years here in Denmark. If anybody would like to get in touch with Kathy, I will drop her contact here down below. And I really want to thank you, Kathy, for making time for this conversation. I'm sure there is so much more we could talk about, but we will tackle that in another setting at another time. To my viewers, I'm thrilled that you could be part of this conversation and listen in. And if you have hung around till the very end, since this is a video podcast primarily on YouTube, and if you want to hear more such conversations, so do consider subscribing and listening in to further conversations with more interesting guests. I will wrap it up by saying thank you for today, Kathy. It's a bright sunny day here. Spring is here. So let's go and embrace newer times and lovely weather. To my viewers, thank you, Kathy, and to my viewers, see you soon.